boa tarde. Estamos aqui para mais uma mesa de conversas do ciclo de debates Panorama Latinoamericano. Eu sou Gabriel Passetti, professor do Instituto de Estudos Estratégicos da UF, que cedia esse evento. Estou aqui com o meu colega José Augusto Ribas Miranda, do IBMEC, que me acompanha desde o começo nessa jornada pelos debates latino-americanos. E a gente tem hoje uma convidada muito especial, né? A professora Devika Misra, diretamente da Índia, para conversar conosco sobre a Índia e a América Latina, né? Vai ser um privilégio a gente poder contar com a apresentação dela e depois com a conversa que a gente vai abrir, né? A gente vai funcionar da seguinte forma: a professora Devika primeiro vai fazer uma prévia apresentação para vocês, contando um pouquinho sobre a Índia e sobre as relações da Índia com a América Latina. À medida que ela for apresentando, vocês, público que nos acompanham aí no YouTube, vocês podem fazer perguntas pelos comentários do YouTube. A gente recebe essas perguntas aqui e a gente vai passar essas perguntas. Depois da apresentação da Devika, a gente começa essa parte mais de perguntas e um debate propriamente falando. Então, sinta-se à vontade para fazer as perguntas. Sejam todas e todos muito bem-vindos a esse nosso panorama latino-americano. É um prazer voltar com essa atividade. Passo agora a palavra ao Zé Augusto.
Boa tarde a todos. Então, eu vou introduzir a Devika, aí daqui para frente a gente já começa com a nossa atividade em inglês, e também nós reforçamos quem puder fazer as perguntas diretamente em inglês, ali pelo chat para a professora Devika. Se não puder também, a gente seleciona as perguntas, traduz e apresenta aqui para a Devika. So we would like to give most warm welcomings to Devika Misra. It's a dear friend and colleague of us. Devika Misra is a doctoral candidate of Latin American Studies program at the Jawarhalal Nehru University. Correct me if I failed my pronunciation. And she's also a lecturer and also an invited professor at the INEST, UF. Teaching topics on Asia and India for this semester for the International Relations undergrad program. So Devika is a very good friend, and she so kindly accepted this invitation to talk today about this geopolitics of the vaccines in India, which is one of the biggest pharmaceutical producers globally, and also a little bit of political institutions of India and Brazil. We have a lot of similarities on this process from right-wing political movements in India and in Brazil, and now we have this new element of the pandemic, and I think that we can have a very good triangular debate on pandemia, politics, and vaccines here today. So thank you, Devika, very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gabriel and Jose, and thank you to everybody who's joining in. So I'm talking to you all from, I think, mostly from UF, but other parts of Brazil as well, from the room where I spent the entire pandemic. So all the teaching, writing, stewing has happened in this little room, and I'm very, very glad to be having this conversation, because something is pretty big happening with the vaccine diplomacy that India is very successfully implementing across the globe. I think it bears to talk about it. So I'm going to do my best to kind of share what's been going on, some ideas which I have been sort of following, especially in terms of this cooperation with Latin America, and how do we kind of take it forward? How do we kind of build something to think about? And I'm going to go really slowly, because the first instruction that Gabriel had given me when I started teaching at UF was speak slowly. Your accent can be difficult to follow along. So let me know if I'm too fast, put it in the chat and I'll slow down. So once the pandemic sort of started, there were increasingly more and more speeches being given by the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where he continuously referred to India as the pharmacy to the world. It's something which you will find in almost all write-ups that are coming out from the Indian side. The idea that India's well-developed pharmaceutical manufacturing capacity would have a role to play in the pandemic, then hardly seems to be a stretch. India's vaccine diplomacy, or vaccine maitri, as it's being called, or vaccine friendship, maitri means friendship in Hindi, is the most recent and also the most visible arm of its pandemic aid policies. So as early as May 2020, there was a shift in Indian foreign policy. What do I mean when I talk about this shift? There was a contact meeting that happened of the non-aligned movement. It happened online, and there is a document which you can all access from the ministry website called the Intervention by Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, this was a shift because the non-aligned movement is steeped in Nehruvian ideology, something which Prime Minister Modi has definitely, kind of been a little against. He had never attended a previous meeting of the NAM movement at all. But yet, once the pandemic sort of happened, he came and he gave this very important speech. He talked about how the international order is changing, how the pandemic exposes, the kind of limits of globalization, the role that India has to play, and again, this idea that India is the pharmacy to the world. And India has a sort of morality which allows it to kind of have this critical outlook towards the international system. Again, kind of underlining the same demand for, a revamping of the international system, as it were. So not only was it, he kind of reactivated NAM, he also, started talking to leaders and foreign ministers in our South Asia Association of Regional Cooperation, SAARC. Again, a regional cooperation based in South Asia, something which has not really been very active, not very prone to meeting regularly. It was activated, an emergency fund was set up. So this idea kind of emerged that India was once again, trying to renegotiate its relationships in the neighborhood in light of the pandemic. The goal was obviously, of all these speeches, the goal was to emphasize the need for a more humane international order that went beyond the pursuit of individual economic interests and focused instead on the collective interests of humanity. The re-emphasis of international cooperation, and most importantly, the fact that India had a moral voice. Indian diplomatic endeavors in the long history of its participation in the international system had always been morally conscious, with its right values, as it were, that could be backed by material capabilities in the revamped national order. And it is this material capabilities where vaccines kind of play a very important role. India as pharmacy to the world has remained a predominant point much before the efforts at vaccine diplomacy began. It's something which has kind of been talked about throughout the pandemic. Indian aid in supplying essential medicines and medical supplies to over 150 countries during a pandemic. In the September 2020 General Assembly meeting, this is something which Prime Minister Modi had again emphasized in his speech. Especially medications such as hydroxychloroquine and paracetamol produced in India, shipped across the world, figuring out the logistics of shipping these medicines in lockdowns, when international travel was, kind of under strict kind of adherence to protocols. India managed to do this and do it very successfully across the world. The second thing that kind of again ties in with this idea of the material capabilities, that India has got the goods to back the claims that the changes that it's demanding at the international level. The economic growth of the Indian pharma and health industry during the pandemic is a remarkable success story. Again, kind of enforcing this idea that India has the material capabilities to make this change that it's demanding happen. This collective goods system based on humanitarian cooperation that it's proposing should morph into the kind of system the kind of cooperation between countries that India has been regularly practicing during the pandemic. When the pandemic started, actually, we were our domestic capacity to produce PPE, ventilators, testing kits was very, very limited. It was something which skyrocketed as the pandemic sort of went on. And not only did the development of these industries, the development of this domestic industry in producing medical supplies needed to combat the pandemic exceed the local demand, it also actually grew to an extent that we could start exporting this. We could start sending this out into the world. Coupled with this were relief operations carried out by Vande Bharat missions, where stranded non-citizens were also evacuated. Again, this idea that India is a country which stands for cooperation, which stands for humanitarian assistance, which believes in growing together as a world, and is not just looking out for itself. So this term vaccine diplomacy, it's very much a policy option. It's not some random epithet that's being bandied about in the media. Indian commitment to provide vaccines globally, whether it is the bilateral initiatives that it has undertaken, the cooperation agreement with the WHO, or the recent meeting between the Quad, which is namely India, Australia, Japan, and the US. This partnership have all been kind of announced on various multilateral fora, with assurances by the Indian Prime Minister that India is going to lend its total support to help all humanity fight this crisis. And this is, I'm quoting this from Prime Minister Modi's speech at the UNGA. The goal is to very much make a difference. The goal is to enforce India's reputation as the pharmacy of the world and bolster faith in the Make in India process that India has kind of also been rolling out over the last few years. And these are all goals which have been identified by our External Affairs Minister. I'm going to just read out a little quote by him during one of his speeches in our parliament recently, where he said that more than our vaccines, our policies and conduct have emerged as a source of strength for the stressed and vulnerable nations of the world. They can see that there is at least one major nation that truly believes in making vaccines accessible and affordable to others in dire need. So simultaneously, while kind of backing the claims that it's kind of making, by kind of being able to provide this aid, while asking others and the UN and other international organizations to do better in the pandemic, it is also kind of identifying India as a major nation, right? The foreign policy search for status and symbolism is totally being met in India's pandemic policies. And there is there's a lot of gung-ho-ness about this achievement, which is, it is a real achievement, the kind of aid that we've been able to organize around the world, and something which international leaders are appreciating. So India won a lot of goodwill thanks to these operations. So these promises of support, support in the fight against the pandemic, they have also served to add heft to India's demands for reformation of the international system. For example, at the UN General Assembly meeting in September, the Prime Minister Modi had actually said this: till when do we have to wait? Talking about the reforms that India, like Brazil, has been kind of asking for in the United Nations Security Council. Till when do we have to wait? Till when will India be kept away from the UN's decision-making process? The idea being that all of this cooperation is an introduction. That look at us, look at our ability, and why can't you introduce changes which reflect our ability? We are able, we are more than capable. Till when do we have to keep asking for a seat at the big table? So the presentation of the pandemic aid, as our External Affairs Minister puts it, is making Indian goodwill meaningful in practical initiatives and activities. It's something concrete that can be verified, that can be checked, that's actually happening at the ground level. It's not just ideological rhetoric. And this, I think this is a very interesting point in all of these invocations of the various regional organizations. because the goal is, the suggestion here is that, listen, not only are we kind of making these kind of moral claims, which are obviously of long standing in the Indian case, but look, today we have the capacity to back them with our own indigenously developed capabilities. So this is a part of India's civilizational congruity between nationalism and internationalism, this idea that India has always been this sort of, global polity. India has always had principles like Vasudev Kutumbakam, principles which kind of make it more prone to understanding the plight of others, tapping into all the decolonization and NAM movement rhetoric, but making it more effective and legitimizing Prime Minister Modi's initiatives by showing exactly the number of vaccines which are being sent out to the number of countries where they are being sent out. So this ideological moral voice with backed material capabilities, India is not presenting this as something which has happened suddenly. It's being presented as a part of, the larger kind of activities that India has seemingly always participated in. And a lot of mention is made of India's contribution in relief efforts in various humanitarian crises, its commitment to global norms like climate change, as well as its leadership and development of initiatives such as the International Solar Alliance. So what's very interesting is that, again, a lot of these initiatives have happened under the Modi government. So the internationalist, humanitarian India, therefore, has a moral right to be at the decision-making table. This is what underlines the human-centric global outreach of India's vaccine Maitri, or again, India's vaccine friendship. So then the question to be asked is that what has been the matrix of India's vaccine diplomacy, especially as far as Latin America and the Caribbean is concerned? As of yesterday, according to the data on our ministry's website, India has supplied Indian manufactured vaccines to 85 countries across the globe. These have either been delivered as grants or commercially. While the first few partners were countries in the neighborhood, especially countries like Bhutan, and if you look up, countries which have had immense success in vaccinating their population, you'll find Bhutan is pretty high up on that list. Several countries of Latin America and the Caribbean have also featured in this list. And I'm going to give you a name of all. There are some 19 out of the 33 countries in the LAC region that we identify, starting from Brazil, Barbados, Dominica, Mexico, Dominican Republic, El Salvador, Argentina, Antigua, Suriname, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Guyana, Jamaica, Belize, Bahamas, Bolivia, and Paraguay, most recently. It is very interesting to note how many Caribbean islands have made this list. And it's not, strangely enough, Trinidad and Tobago is not on the list, where, a lot of Indian diasporic kind of communication starts happening. According to a recent study carried out by, GIGA, the idea is that the Caribbean nations have also been playing some pretty interesting, international level politics while kind of negotiating this vaccine aid, especially between India and China. So the idea is that Caribbean nations have just as many votes in the UN General Assembly, in the UN system, that they have been able to very smartly kind of maneuver into getting greater doses of vaccines. And the idea is that the fact that the population of many of these islands is so small that even a rather small consignment from one of these countries can actually have very, very far-reaching consequences as far as the efficacy of their vaccination programs is concerned. So something like Dominica, it's remarkable because I was reading that they have also received a consignment of vaccines from ALBA nations. So, the ability of the Caribbean to kind of maneuver this vaccine diplomacy politics has been very, very interesting. So this brings me to the next point. So what are the geopolitics of vaccine sharing that Jose was talking about? What are the geopolitics? What are the consequences, as it were? So right now, this idea is that many countries, whether it's India or whether it's China, they're kind of using this vaccine diplomacy to ensure certain successes at the international level. China has obviously, kind of been blamed for using this diplomacy as a way to gain support on the Taiwan issue. Whereas India, of course, the idea is that the more votes, the more members you have on your side, the more kind of reformation your positions will get at the General Assembly level. So, for example, recently, this is something as recent as yesterday. India sent a consignment of vaccines to Paraguay, and the foreign minister of Taiwan came out with this claim that India has actually stepped in to kind of manage Chinese aggression against Paraguay, because Paraguay is one of the countries that recognizes Taiwan. And the fact that India has stepped in has disallowed China from carrying out this kind of politics, with something as crucial as medical aid and as crucial as vaccines. So the Indian government and the Indian External Affairs Ministry has strenuously denied this. They have completely denied this, and they have argued that there was no third-party involvement in the decision to share vaccines, that India is trying to open up an embassy in Paraguay, that they have been having some conversations with, the Argentinian diplomat, the Paraguayan diplomats, and they have reached out and, kind of given this aid. But, and China, on the other hand, has also, been very critical of this statement by the Taiwanese foreign minister, because they have been saying that Taiwan is trying to play cash diplomacy, right? Taiwan kind of judges everybody's humanitarian efforts by their own lens. So things like this are already happening, and we are maybe like 2 months into this entire exercise. And it's very interesting because this brings up this, perpetuated or perpetrated competition between India and China's different vaccine diplomacies. The idea is that this competition between India and China and their respective vaccine diplomacies has been, sort of instituted in the media. So if you do a little search, you will find articles like op-ed articles like from Wall Street Journal saying India's vaccine diplomacy has beaten China's vaccine diplomacy. So this competition has already been instituted. And it becomes very interesting when we again kind of look back at that reactivation of SAARC, because according to a lot of analysts, the idea is that India has kind of tried to use the pandemic aid to again sort of, recover some of its clout in the neighborhood, which it had lost out to China. The idea is that again, India is sort of trying to, assert itself as a important and influential neighbor to have, sort of repair some of these relationships which were in disarray. And that becomes really problematic when both these diplomacies are kind of pitted side to side. It's too soon to really say that are they truly in competition, but there is data. There is data that this kind of backdoor, negotiating is happening. This kind of one-upping of each other is going on. So yeah, and the idea is that again, that vaccine friendship or vaccine maitri and health Silk Road, which is the Chinese name for Chinese vaccine diplomacy, are in competition. And in competition in terms of, in more ways than one. In the region, globally, for influence, in various ways. So what's happening in India right now? The third kind of, I would say, dimension to this is the very interesting domestic dimension. What is happening in India, where cases have been surging since April 1st to some pretty scary, levels. Suddenly this idea, all this kind of goodwill building, all this kind of international collaboration has had to meet the challenge of COVID cases rising domestically. So several states in India have kind of registered record-breaking surges in the rise of COVID cases. vaccine shortages are being reported, and continuously this conversation is coming out from various states that we don't have enough stocks. For example, in Maharashtra, which is incidentally not the state government is not BJP led. They've been kind of, again, this idea that migrants should leave, migrant laborers should go back to their states because the Maharashtra state government does not have enough vaccines. This kind of censure of the national government, that you have been doing this kind of goodwill building, this kind of brand building outside the country, and yet your own people are not vaccinated. According to the data that the ministry has released, and they have continuously stressed this in their speeches, the goal has always been to keep the two together. It's not been to send vaccines abroad at the expense of the domestic population. However, different articles will kind of quote different numbers at you. The recent numbers would suggest that domestic vaccinations have greatly exceeded the vaccines that we have exported. But according to some articles which you would see end of February, they would raise this question that vaccination in India has been much slower than many other countries. So the other interesting angle is that these calls for shortages, right? This fact that the central government is sort of failing the state governments. It kind of becomes very interesting, especially when you compare BJP governed states and states where there is obviously the opposition is in party. So again, this kind of idea, this kind of petty politics and mudslinging has also started, where the health minister would say that these are all rumors. The state governments are trying to hide their own inefficiency, their own mismanagement of the crisis on the central government. The fact that there is no vaccine shortage, there are this many. These are the numbers of vaccines that have been administered. These are the numbers that we have in stock. These are the numbers which are in the pipeline. And this is, again, it's become really, it's still developing, but it's become really potent because there are kind of elections happening in India right now, state elections. So the political angle has also come in. And what's most interesting to me is that that entire huge international policy, thanks to the fact that, and this is something which they are saying for China as well, that both these countries, can they really manage their domestic situation while doing this international, sharing agreement. So as of now, exports have started being, stopped. There is a certain focus which is turning inwards. The Indian government, is trying to stop, kind of control the export of vaccines internationally, and focusing more and more inwards. And this is again going to raise problems because, like I think Gabriel was mentioning, India is currently the largest manufacturer of COVID vaccines, and this is thanks to one institute in particular. And that institute is, it might have to renege on some of its agreements with, with international partners if it's not able to really supply all these vaccines. So, so this is where we kind of see the Indian vaccine diplomacy puzzle. At one end, it really ties in with something that has been the kind of internationalist bent humanitarian aid, debate that the government has been trying to push for a while. The fact that India believes in a just world. India believes in an equitable world. India believes in a world where there are rights for everyone. The kind of normal South-South cooperation rhetoric that you would hear. Then it has kind of become very potent in the fact that we have had a lot of pharma success. The fact that we have become the biggest manufacturers of this vaccine. The fact that we have been able to successfully share so many so much kind of medical supply and so much kind of medical aid during the pandemic, even before the vaccine. It has kind of again added to that aspect of material capabilities of India. Then the goal is again to kind of demand for a change at the international order. Curry votes, curry favor. I think that's what's happening with its Latin American partners. and simultaneously, economic gain as well. But the domestic angle really, really complicates this. Even though vaccine diplomacy seems like a really good way to kind of manage many crises that India has successfully avoided, whether in the region or internationally, kind of get over a lot of the criticism that we've been getting domestically about what are our politics, as towards our own people. All this goodwill internationally, while every kind of human index, kind of India is falling in points, whether it's happiness index or something like freedom of press, we are just falling through the ranks. So it's been an interesting paradox. And the most interesting thing that has happened is now what's going to happen. Now that we are in such an unfortunate situation with the surges in COVID cases, more cases are coming in that have come in India throughout the pandemic. How are we really going to balance the strategy? What are going to be the repercussions for all these big promises that we've made, which are obviously difficult to, imagine keeping at this moment? What is going to be, the kind of scenario that unfolds? So I think this is something very interesting, and it's, developing. And thank you for listening to me. This is all that, I kind of wanted to share, and we can continue our conversation in the discussion. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Devika, very much. It was really interesting. I really like especially this Caribbean diplomacy regarding this Indian vaccines, how India is operating in the Caribbean, which is a very, it's a good bargaining, right? Even for votes in the UN, like China does this all the time with the Pacific Islands, with the Caribbean small islands. And also you have this historical connection also, right? From many Caribbean islands with Indian migrants from the British time. Suriname is one of those places, and you have also some communities in Jamaica, I guess. So it's really interesting, this point.
It's not just happening in Latin America. The point that you made about the Pacific Islands, if you go through their strategy for how they planned on promoting the vaccine diplomacy program, this was very much a part of their plan to target small islands, and they mentioned small islands of the CARICOM, as well as African islands and Pacific islands. And then they have kind of moved on to the larger partners. So it's very strategic. It's very smart. It makes good sense what they're doing.
Yeah. I have a first question for you, a more structured question regarding internal politics and pandemics, and how Indian political institutions are dealing with it. In Brazil, we have the worst performance on managing the pandemic in the whole world. This is one of the Brazilian achievements the last year and this year. And here the central government is using the pandemics to polarize internal politics. So since the management is so awful, they have no option than use the pandemics, like to renegade the pandemics, to say, no, this is not too serious. We can use other kind of treatments and polarize the internal political scenario here. And this is very costly for our political institution as well. So then suddenly you have the Congress, you have public people saying that they do not believe in vaccines, or they do not support, or they do not show enough support, and the president is the main one, right? How is the Modi government in India using pandemics internally? We have seen that the Indian government is kind of concentrating power, and also the challenging institutions as well, challenging religious minorities in India, Muslims, which are not minorities at all in India, but even though the government has this very nationalistic approach, is Modi government using pandemics to strengthen his positions in an autocratic way in Indian politics?
I think that's a great question, and it's a multi-layered question, because I can immediately think of so many angles with which to kind of approach this question. So what happens in India? The pandemic was announced with, I think, at the notice of 4 hours. The lockdown was instituted. And what that kind of began was people being stuck. Say you were somebody who wasn't really careful enough to, make plans, didn't kind of anticipate that something like this would be announced and all cross-border travel would stop. You were just stuck. So for example, I used to live in JNU, and I was really smart. My dad was very smart that I came back to my hometown. Otherwise, say you had gone to visit a friend's house, you were just stuck there. You were not allowed to move. So what happened was that as this pandemic, as this lockdown was kind of announced in a really paternalistic manner, I would say, with not much room given to kind of, the logistical support, what happened was lots of people got stuck in places, especially migrant workers. In Delhi, this happened majorly. You had people who had no means of supporting themselves, very afraid, cases rising. And what happened was almost like this exodus, because there was no, public transport that they could avail. People just started walking back home. We had deaths. There were so many deaths that happened, and the kind of coverage that happened of that migrant crisis, again, it was very polarized, because some people would say that there's fear mongering going on. People should just stick to where they are, and these would be people who have people who have relocated back to their homes and privileged, because everybody's afraid of dying. So something like that happened during the pandemic. Similarly, when the pandemic happened, and it's not just the government, the Indian government. And when the pandemic happened, right before that, we had riots in Delhi. President Trump had been visiting when that entire clash had kind of happened in Delhi. A massive citizens' protest had been going on against the Citizenship Amendment Act. It was mostly led by Muslim women, by elderly women. It had, times caught up with it. By the time the pandemic had happened, more than 100 days of that protest had been going on. So the pandemic was again kind of instituted to clear out those women. And they left because, it was a public health emergency. And the Delhi government, which is not a BJP government, by the way, they took like maybe a day to paint over all the graffiti that had happened. And these protests were really inspired by the real violence that had happened, against two huge central universities in India. One was JNU, and the other, the much worse violence happened at Jamia Millia Islamia, again in a very big university in Delhi. So this was the way in which they kind of dismantled an important citizens' protest. Then simultaneously throughout the pandemic, what has happened is there was you raised the point of the Muslim question, right? There was a huge hue and cry over this event called Tablighi Jamaat, where you have Muslim Muslim devotees coming into India for a particular event, and there was a surge in cases. The kind of media coverage that happened of that report, it was very much that all Muslims hate, Muslims are against India. There is no education here. This is why India has COVID cases now. It was really religiously driven, and the problem is that right now we have a huge Hindu festival going on called the Kumbh, and the numbers for the Kumbh are something like 5,000 people versus 100,000 people, right? Tablighi was 5,000, and the same kind of debates are not really happening. We just finished Holi. Holi is again a very important Hindu festival in India. Then what else has happened? A lot of laws were passed during the pandemic period without due deliberation. A lot of new ideas were proposed. A lot of very problematic arrests were made, which actually, and they weren't given bail. And a lot of these were again young students who had been involved in the citizenship rights protest. So the pandemic is kind of introduced again and again very conveniently in terms of supporting this public health argument, especially when it is to disrupt a movement. So right now, the farmers' protests have been going on for a very, very long time. Again, this concern was raised that, all these people meeting together, it's going to lead to cases, to spike in COVID cases. And yet, a very important televised event had happened when the foundation of the Ram temple was laid down in Ayodhya. I mean, Narendra Modi was there. Elections are kind of continuing on right now. Indian social media is rife with with memes that you can watch these interviews. People, they're reporters going up to villagers and they're asking, why aren't you afraid from COVID? And they're like, no, COVID is going to happen after the elections now. COVID infections are not going to happen during this time. So I feel in terms of, when you say, has it led to more kind of, one-sided policy making? I think that was happening even before the pandemic. It has been a high-handed approach always, because demonetization was also similarly announced and there was no pandemic at that point of time. But has it really affected the legitimacy of the government? No. I think the legitimacy of the Indian government, the Indian citizen genuinely feels that the Indian government is doing a good job with the pandemic. That's the general public's consensus. And things like vaccine diplomacy are only adding to this idea that this is a person who knows what he's doing. I have seen memes from Brazilian friends where they say where they want to be in the situation that India is in right now. So I feel like we are not in a chaotic situation. We are in a situation of more concentration of power and legitimacy. International leaders, so something like Justin Trudeau condemning the kind of excesses against the farmers during the farmers' protest, and then within a week later, the tweet comes out from Narendra Modi's account that just shared this vaccine with our Canadian friends. So it's not working. Any kind of international criticism of human rights excesses doesn't stand in this kind of humankind for all conversation that the pandemic has induced in India. So I think he's been very, very successful with concentrating his legitimacy, not even power. He already had the power, but his legitimacy. So that's scary in another way.
Yeah. If there is one thing the pandemic is doing politically in Brazil is erode the government's legitimacy every day. So at least it's a very different scenario. It's pretty interesting. We have some questions here on chat. First, we're going to address Leticia Neves. India has been a great player on global health diplomacy. Is there a relation between the distribution of vaccines that is happening today and the production of antiretrovirals at the 2000?
Specifically, I mean, I don't have the data for the 2000 case, but yes, the argument that I was trying to build in my presentation as well was that this vaccine diplomacy is not something new. This is just how India is. This is just how India does international politics. So there is very much an attempt at creating this culture of cooperation, in India. That is why there's all these principles of Vasudev Kutumbakam being talked about. Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is something which Modi government is really pushing. It's self-reliant India. Again, this idea that India is sharing vaccines made in India. That itself is a point of pride. So this is all part of a larger narrative. But the problem with the 2000 issue, again, there was a coalition government with the BJP at that point of time. So they are very much tapping into the civilizational discourse. So this is something which India is trying to build on. They are trying to say, look, we've been doing this for years. So where is the United Nations Security Council reformation? Where is it? Where is our permanent seat? We've been doing this for years. We have always been committed to these values. This is the morality of India as a nation. So yeah, I do think that it's connected.
Devika, could the B of BRICS play a more prominent role in this current geopolitical scenario relative to vaccine production? Does Brazil today end up harming this cooperation?
Honestly, this is a really... Sorry. Yeah. Honestly, this is a really sad question to get, because I was talking about regional health cooperation, because that's what I study. I study regional integration mechanisms, and I was discussing this recently, I think on Wednesday. And it was really, really sad to see, because we started having this conversation about how countries are closing their borders to Brazil to contain the spread from a country that used to be a regional leader, a country that kind of really pushed for UNASUR. The most kind of interesting health-based cooperation that has happened since Mercosur, as it were. And again, Mercosur is something that Brazil was behind. So I genuinely feel for Brazil. I feel like it's in a very bad situation. There is not a lot of legitimacy remaining as far as pandemic management is concerned. In my opinion, this is an opinion. I might be totally wrong. I hope I'm totally wrong. With Brazil, I think in the BRICS scenario especially, I think India and China and even Russia, like they're all producing their own vaccines. And if there is a candidate from the Latin American side that seems like they will come up with a solution of their own, it seems to be Cuba, with all their trials, with all the kind of talk of developing indigenous vaccine, and the others might come up with management strategies. But Brazil, I honestly don't want to say anything mean, but like I genuinely think that at least in BRICS, it's not going to be able to meet up to that capacity gap which exists between Brazil and the others in the group.
It's Russia, India, and China are producing vaccines, and Brazil and South Africa producing new viruses variants. So it's kind of complement each other. Even in this terrible scenario, Brazil chose his spot very well, like producing new viruses when you produce the vaccine.
Yes.
May I have a question also? It's connected to this question that was from our secretary Thiago that about BRICS. And my question, actually, two questions. The first of them is also about these BRICS. We in Brazil, we have a lot of curiosity on India. And for more than a decade, we talk about India because of this BRICS group. Yeah, we have a lot of discussion and a lot of debates in academy and economics and the politics about the BRICS. So I wish to ask you, how is this connection and this group seen on India? We have a very strong how can I say this? A very strong, God, I lost the word. We are very interested, and the Brazilians are very, very interested on this BRICS because it makes a new image of Brazil as a new power in the world, this kind of thing. So the first question is this: how is this BRICS group seen on India, and especially this the Brazilian part of it?
Okay. Again, BRICS was something which was which added to that idea that that India is a candidate for a reformed international order, and the cooperation that had started between India and Brazil. I mean, I was reading up again on the space cooperation as well, because I know from the class that is something which is very interesting to everybody in Brazil. So this idea of natural partnership, that India and Brazil are natural partners, the fact that they want the same things at the international system, some very kind of similarities in the social structures as well. It's very much there. How does India view Brazil? that point that I was making earlier about how India has been using various multilateral fora to kind of assert this fact that I am a country that can come here and assure you that I am going to help the world during the pandemic. And look, I am doing it. One of the things that the documents from the ministry will refer this again and again, that they will say that we are the hosts and we are the secretaryship of Brazil, of BRICS, sorry. I'm forgetting the main word, but we have the presidency right now. So BRICS is something which generates a lot of enthusiasm amongst the very small community of Latin Americanists in India, people like me. So it's something which is, but in the larger sense, it does add a lot of prestige. Again, that search for status. This idea that, India is part of this organization, which reimagines what power in the international system looks like. The fact that, we are one of the BRICS is pretty big. I feel like the Brazilian emphasis is there. Let's leave aside the pandemic year, because the pandemic has not been kind to Brazil. But just before the pandemic had happened, Bolsonaro was here. I mean, there was so much enthusiasm, even with Bolsonaro. I was in that meeting when he came to India, when he was in Delhi. And I was the only one who, sort of like, everybody was standing and I was just like sitting there. So I resisted on behalf of all of you. But, when he was there, this idea that, again, India-Brazil cooperation seems to be getting closer. There were arms deals that were being signed, I remember. The agro cooperation angle doesn't really work. But I do feel that, especially this, the bioethanol kind of component, that is something which is going to become increasingly important, because again, in this just, equitable, benefit humankind world order that India foresees itself as not only being a part of, but creating, clean energy is something which we are pushing pretty strongly. All our statements will kind of mention this, that how we are very good at, keeping up with the requirements of the various climate change agreements, and the fact that we are really pushing the International Solar Alliance. So I think that is going to be something where I feel like, I don't know about BRICS so much because I don't genuinely study BRICS, but I feel as far as India, Brazil are concerned, there is more and more Indian businesses are moving into South America. I was just reading today, one of our really giants in online education, Byju's, school education. They are kind of, they've just bought up shares in various Latin American polities. More and more oil is being discussed. Energy is definitely going to be something which India and Brazil cooperate on. But I do feel like that idea, that multilateral nexus that India and Brazil are supposed to, sort of want to create, I think that's going to be the main thing on which they organize. But how has the pandemic interrupted this? I mean, Brazil was one of the first countries where we sent the vaccines. And there was some conversation that was happening at that time that India has kind of held off in sending the vaccines because of the position that Brazil has taken in WTO. And then when kind of, some reformation to that position happened, then India very happily sent the vaccine, and we had all this conversation about Modi and Bolsonaro being great friends. So yeah, I don't have too much specifically to say about BRICS because unfortunately I don't study the BRICS too much, but I would say that it's a big part of this reimagined world order. How effective is it going to be post-pandemic? I don't know, because always this China-India thing is going to remain problematic. And China, and I was teaching that today in class, I mean, China sees Russia as a real power. They don't really they think that India speaks too much for the amount of capabilities that we have. They see us as an important player, but not really as a power that could challenge them. So yeah. Sorry, Gabriel. It's not more elaborated.
No, thank you very much. I think this BRICS theme, we are talking very much about this here, and this make it a connection more strong about Brazil and India that we didn't have. You were talking just a minute ago about this very small Latin American specialist group in India. So I wish to talk to you and ask you, how is to study Brazil, Latin America, in India? Which are the difficulties, the possibilities, and the interests of this very small group of Latin Americanists in India? And thank you to studying us and helping to make these connections.
I think that's the best question. that's the best question that anybody has ever asked me. I would say we are a small group compared to the size of our country. We are a small group. Latin Americanists in India are a small group, but we are so passionate. The department that I study in, it's existed for a very, very long time. It's Jose has met Professor Nafe. Professor Nafe was the only professor on Latin American politics in India for something like 20 years, because it is such a small group. So I think now the good thing is that even the private players who are coming in, Jindal University and all, they are introducing departments on Latin America. So that's very, very interesting to me, because Latin Americanists for me meant that you were a little like many of us like me were literature students. You fell in love with the literature, and I read Garcia Marquez, and then I read Dependency, and I was like, this is it. There is nothing more fascinating that I could ever study. In terms of problems in studying the region, there is no dearth of problems. The first thing is the language. So I learned Spanish. I am still learning Spanish. It was so expensive to actually learn Spanish. But it is still doable. Learning Brazilian Portuguese is not possible. It's just too difficult to do it. Then this idea that when you are an Indian studying, Brazil, first things that happen is, even if you go into like a neutral setting where you will meet people from the north who are studying very happily, people from the UK, from the US, calling themselves Latin Americanists. And they will always ask you that question, that why Latin America? And I said, why are you studying Latin America? Oh, I like the politics. I said, I like the politics. So this idea that, third world and global south people should only study their region. There are more than 1 billion of us. If all of us only studied South Asia, it would be really, really boring. But I feel like the community is incredible. I feel like the Latin American IR community, including both of you. I mean, I have never written an email, apart from some professors at University of Brasilia. I have never written an email asking for an article which I have not gotten. I have never met a Brazilian academic, even on Twitter, who has not been fascinated by this idea that, people study Brazil in India. And I feel like it's something that you can give your life to, because and I was lucky enough to be able to come there for a field trip. I know the struggles that went into getting that field trip to happen. It was honestly the best of, what we call, there's a word in Hindi, we call this jugaad. Basically, it means that trying hook or crook to make something happen when you don't have the resources, but you nevertheless have the spirit to get stuff done, which is, I feel, something that all global South scholars are good at, because we know what it is like to not be able to access articles, to not be able to have that fancy training on how to get into these international journals immediately. That happened, but I feel like I learned so much just by being there, things I could have never found online. Brazil is particularly difficult. Because the Spanish culture, I feel it has permeated India a lot more. We have a lot of appreciation for the Spanish literature, but Brazilian Portuguese, and the fact that not enough Brazilians are coming to India, it's something that should change, because they're incredible. The Brazilian literature that I have managed to read is amazing. It's very hard, but it's the best, and it's the greatest community to belong to, and it's so exciting to meet people who are just as curious about you as you are about them, and everything feels like, I'm sorry, I'm really passionate. I've gotten passionate about this. It's very hard, but I wouldn't study anything else. Into how they think, and not in the way people from the north might treat all of us. So I hope that Brazilian will also study India. That's my goal. And I've been brainwashing a lot of the students into ensuring that. So yes, thank you, Gabriel.
Yeah, I think this you had a so beautiful expression that when why does this UK academics can research Latin America or India or I don't know Togo and everything, and we cannot. And another thing is that this global South, this South research are so important. So when we research about India, we have another look on India. And when you research Latin America, you have a look very different than of these guys from United Kingdom or United States and global North. I think this connection is very, very interesting and important, and we are very pleased to have you teaching to our undergrad students. I don't know if Devika is still there. To me, she's okay. Your connection is back. Devika, we have another question from the public. Okay, it's with India and China being the two major vaccine producers,
sure.
Has it escalated the already high tensions between them in a competition to provide it to the neighboring countries such as Nepal and Bhutan? And another one, Mrs. Misra, how about
I think that's a great question. Oh, okay.
Let's do the first one and then the second one. Yeah, okay.
Okay. So I think that's a great question. There is definitely a competition because again, it's two very different mindsets trying to introduce a reformation in the international system. So I would say that more than the region, more than this competition amongst the region, because India was very quick to send vaccines to the neighbors that it approves of, namely not Pakistan. I think this competition has more sort of intensified in the cooperation, military cooperation, various political agreements that India is making in the Indo-Pacific, which I feel are genuinely, creating a credible threat to China, as it were. Again, the language is very, very, very non-threatening. So we signed a couple of, agreements with Japan. There was an agreement. There was a document from Germany. There some cooperation has been happening with Australia, the Quad, as it were. Again, this idea was that India is, only conducting military exercises. So even if, some of our analysts, because we have this conversation, being anti-China is also being very pro-nationalism. And you get all kinds of interesting comments in India, which are just funny, which they don't make any sense, but, they occur. So like some people, when the June kind of crisis had happened at Galwan between India and China, that border skirmish that happened, all the analysts agree that that has been the worst thing that has happened in India-China relations for the longest time. And we had a year of, hostility at Ladakh, right? The region where this happened. And there were calls for war in India. Like people were like, we will stop buying anything from China, which is really funny because again, what is not made in China? Can you ever really have anything where something has not been made in China? People are throwing their television sets. Yet once this conversation about developing the vaccine started, again, the conversation changed. Then from the government, you started hearing things like this, that India and China have to cooperate. If this crisis has to be, averted, India and China will have to be partners in the responses to this pandemic. So again, the vaccine diplomacy thing was very interesting there. But in terms of, has it kind of produced a competition in the neighboring countries? Not Bhutan. Bhutan is pretty pro-India. With Nepal, there is some contention, and Bhutan has always been a close ally of India. People have been arguing that a lot of the efforts that India has taken within South Asia, whether it's the SARC fund or the continuous meetings that we are having, has been a way to kind of reclaim its space in the region, which it sort of lost post 2008 once China started having more of these ambitions of, exerting itself more visibly in the world, creating a very, very present partnerships, as it were. So yeah, I think that the Indo-Pacific cooperation, especially this thing that has happened recently, the US Quad agreement that we are going to, produce 1 billion, share 1 billion vaccines or something like that. And it's very interesting because, again, the Quad is very new. So a lot of our analysts, there is a flurry of webinars that is kind of happening right now. So the competition, I feel, it's not so much in the region, but it's more in the Indo-Pacific. And there it's being dealt very cautiously, not just by India, but all the other associated partners. But again and again, this idea is being raised that we are all committed to developing a stable and secure Indo-Pacific region. We want security in the Indo-Pacific region. So right now, as of now, I would say that we are going to have some talks with China. They were supposed to happen today. Various things are, ongoing. It's a very, very foreign policy rich kind of environment that we are living in. Things are happening every day. But this competition, it's mostly, I would say that it is kind of the competition that I've sketched out in my presentation, trying to, curry favor amongst smaller countries. And I'm glad to see countries playing these big giants against each other. I'm proud of all the Caribbean countries for what they've managed to do.
We have one last question here that's related also to India and China. That's how border tensions between India and China can affect relations about vaccine production and distribution around the two countries. That's something we were talking just now, but if you have any question, any point on this.
I don't understand. Raphael, do you mean production and distribution amongst India and China? I haven't found that kind of cooperation occurring. I think that the Chinese are doing their own thing and we are doing our own thing. So these border skirmishes, again, this is something which is very old in India and China relations. Like, our border is deeply contested. It's something which led to the war that India had with China. It's something which happened with Galwan. We keep trying these confidence building measures, but I feel that, again, China is not, in my opinion, and I'm not a China expert, but I don't think China is threatened at all by India. Okay, it genuinely, but India, definitely, we are continuously trying to present ourselves as, firstly, we are very threatened by China because it's a credible threat. Secondly, there is a lot of distrust, misperception on both sides. And thirdly, I think that India tries to present itself as this other democratic option from the South, but which is not China. At least that's the reading that I have, seeing the kind of cooperation that India and China have had in Latin America. Pretty much our line seems to be, listen, we can't give you the loans that China can, but we are not going to be as extractivist as China is, right? We are a democratic country. We are a better deal. And this is something that Latin American countries recognize. So a couple of weeks back, we had the Costa Rican ambassador who was talking about this, that how he finds himself, how Costa Rica finds itself stuck in this ungodly position of having to manage its relationship with the United States, of having to manage its relationship with China. It's deeply kind of contentious neighborhood where, it's obviously more prosperous than its neighboring countries. And how, if India were to kind of come in as an important player in Costa Rica, it could be a great deal. So he was kind of, and he really mentioned this, that how it would be, and this is something which most Latin American experts seem to mention, that India seems to be a more equitable bargain. So yeah, as far as the vaccine production and distribution is concerned, there are two trajectories, two both doing very different things, as far as I know. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I wish to thanks very, very much to Devika Misra for this afternoon. to us afternoon, with us and with this big audience on YouTube. This conference is being recorded and will be available to everybody on YouTube. And I wish this to be one of the bridges between Latin America and India, and this South-South dialogue. Devika is establishing these connections with our students on Universidade Federal Fluminense. She's teaching undergrad discipline on India and Asia international relations. I wish to thank you very much to be here with us in this Panorama Latinoamericano. I don't know if José Augusto wish to talk something before we end this conference. And thank you very much, Devika. It was a very nice opportunity to learn on India and Latin America.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Obrigado, Devika.
See you. Bye-bye, people.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you to the support team, especially Tiago and Igor. Thank you so much. And bye-bye.